Guys, my name is Eric Königsdorfer, and I started this channel wanting to share with you what I've learned during my career in graphic design, advertising, and branding. This is what I call brand communication. Today, we will be talking about typography. I love typography. Typography is very sexy. Not in a literal sense, of course, you get me. Typography is the art of making the printed written language readable, legible, and appealing. Typography effectiveness also relies very heavily on effective layout design, graphic design. We will be talking about how to pick the proper font or typeface, the do's and the don'ts of typography, a little bit of history, a little bit of anatomy of a typeface, and why you absolutely need to care about good typography. When communication is face-to-face, we do rely on a lot of extra signals for proper communication, body language, gestures, facial expressions, etc. The reader then is only left with the printed text to interpret your meaning. Typography plays a crucial role in effective and proper communication. At its most basic level, we have all experienced in an email communication the meaning of a message written in all caps. Is this person angry at you? Is this person yelling at you? It's all written in caps after all, we don't know. There is also the use of the italics. What does it mean when you say, oh, you are very pretty, or are you very pretty? You know, that can be very misinterpreted. Also, the use of bold fonts is invaluable in highlighting part or portion of the text that you really want to draw attention to. Lawyers are expert in the use of typography, especially italics and bolded fonts. They can change the meaning on the most obvious sentence into the complete opposite or something different that will suit the argument in court. Bill Clinton's famous declaration, "I did not have sex with that woman," and the analytic response from his lawyer shed a very new light on the use of italics. If you want to have a look at the transcript of the lawyers, this is give you a completely new meaning of the use of typography and how invaluable it is to influence the meaning of the written words. With the correct use of typography, you can really sell ice to an Eskimo. Typography has also a very practical mean. It helps the written words to be legible, accessible, readable. The leading, the space between each sentence and its phrases will make the text denser and harder to read, which is a vital point when you have pages and pages of a document to read, like a contract, for example. A text printed too small with not enough space between each sentence make it very difficult to read. Typography with the correct use of layout design is the user interface between the message and the reader, and directly influence the reader's experience. And a good experience is essential to good communication. This is like a conversation with somebody. If you do not like this person or you find this person very boring, you just leave. And you really don't want that with the person who is going to read your text. Typography is also beautiful and will make the experience more pleasurable. Typography makes the printed text legible and readable. Legible means that each individual characters are decipherable, identifiable, and recognizable. Readable refers to the experience of reading the text. It refers to the space between each sentence or the space between each letters. If it's too dense, it won't be readable. The space between each words is called the tracking. The space between each letters is called the kerning. The space between each sentence is called the leading. And of course, the last element for readability is the font size. There is the eternal argument between serif and sans serif, and which one is the most readable. It is said that the sans serif is more readable as a body copy in a book, for example. Well, I'm not sure about that and I actually disagree. Either are fine. Do's and don'ts. There's only a few things you really need to take care of. Hierarchy. You need to draw the attention of your potential reader slowly, carefully. You start with a big hook, which is the main heading. The subheadings will be what the reader will be reading next, just to have an idea of what we are talking about in the text. And then the reader will delve into the main body. That's a hierarchy. You need to be very careful that it's all very clear, that all the subheadings are consistent across the document, and the main headings are consistent as well. Kerning is very important. Kerning is a space between each individual letter. You will not care too much about kerning in a body copy of the text, the main text, but for headings, maybe less for subheadings. But for main headings, you really need to be careful with the space between each letters, because most of the fonts do not have the proper spacing between each letters, and some letters, particularly between an X and an I and an N will be too close, an X and an I will be too far, or C, an I and a C will be too far as well, so we'll need to be closer. All this needs to be done by hand. You need to be very careful to not have the text too small, especially on business cards. It's very common to see all the details printed extra small. Too many fonts. The maximum that I will use is 3 fonts, but ideally 2 fonts. One for the headings and subheadings, and one for the main body copy. White space. Be very careful with your text to not fill the whole page. You don't need that. You need to breathe in a page, just like you need to breathe in life. Too crowded is never healthy. So leave a lot of white space around. All caps. Be very careful with all caps. Too much all caps becomes very difficult. You don't want that too much in text. You can get away with a small introduction or a paragraph in all caps, but depending on the font that you pick. So be very careful with that. Gothic all caps. This is we see that very often on the tattoos written in all caps. Horrible. The caps for a Gothic font are only on the first letter. The rest of the word should be in lower caps, or it looks ugly and unreadable. Display fonts. There is a lot of fonts created on the net nowadays. Every day, a lot of fonts, but not all of them are professional or even beautiful and good taste. So be very careful on the font, the display font that you choose. That could be a very bad taste and a bad decision. Consistency. Very important to have a proper consistency across a document. You have to stick to the fonts that you are using, the size, and how you break the information in your document. Appropriateness. You have to be very careful that the font that you pick suit the subject matter of the text. If you choose a very stern font, it's great for a medical document or technical document. If you choose a very punk font and rock and roll font, don't use that in a medical document. That will not look very serious. Typeface or fonts. We hear the term, both terms. In fact, we owe that to Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs did a lot of great things, but he did one thing that was wrong. And he loved typography. He loved typography, but he did one thing wrong. Is to call a typeface a font in the first operating system of the Macintosh. Since then, everybody is calling a typeface a font. But a font is only bold, italic, and Roman. That's a font. A typeface is an Helvetica, an Arial, a Times New Roman. That's a typeface, not a font. The font is the bold in a Times New Roman. How do you choose the right typeface for a specific content? Each typeface has a personality. And just like people, you should match each typeface and their personality with their content. You will have a font that will be very traditional, like Garamond's and Times New Romans. It can be used to give you authority. There's only a few criteria to pay attention to when you want to pick the right font with the subject matter. Context is one of them. Are we talking about a historical document? Are we talking about a medical, technical document? Practicality. Is this readable? Is this legible? Emotion. Is the text and the content about love? Is it about meditation? Is it about medical journal? Is it serious? Is it fun? Typography is everywhere. It is here, here, here again, and here. And here, it's here too, and there, and there, and here, and here, here, everywhere. It is everywhere. There is three families of typeface most commonly used today. The serif, the sans serif, and a display font. Prior Gutenberg and the printing press, books were copied by hand from an original. A black letter style of writing was used then. And naturally, Gutenberg used the same typeface to print his very famous Bible. The typeface he used as a removable typeface cast in lead was called the 42-line Bible. It was called 42-line Bible because you could only fit 42 lines in a page, and that was 1456. Later, in Italy, the black letter typeface evolved in a softer typeface called the Roman in 1464. Unfortunately, the Roman-style typeface was left in the hand of artisans who were each casting their own engraving, their own style of Roman. And little by little, the design deteriorated. It became less and less good, less and less readable, and was not that legible. In 1692, the French king Louis XIV commissioned Philippe Grandjean to create the Imprimerie Royale, the royal print house, and commissioned Philippe Grandjean to create a typeface that was called the King's Roman, le Romain du Roi. Early Roman typeface developed naturally over time, evolving in the hands of each punch cutters. The Romain du Roi was the result of a rational design. Each letter were designed on a grid before being cut in metal. Being on a grid, each letter's curves were consistent from one another, each lines were consistent from one another, and the height, everything was consistent from one another. Each serif, the empattement, was regular across each letter. All this made this typeface more harmonious and rigorous in design. Before we jump into that, please do not forget to like this video if you do like this video, of course. And if you want to subscribe and press the bell, like this you will be notified on all new content that I will be posting every week, which in turn will help me to create new content and post more video. There is only a few things you need to know relevant to a non-professional. All caps, lower caps, italic, Roman, serif, ligature, superscript, subscript, baseline, kerning, tracking, leading, margins, caps uppercase, lowercase. Why do we call caps an uppercase as opposed to a lowercase? With the invention of the printing press, each letter was a movable type. All those movable types and letters had to be stored in a box of some sort. They could not just lie around on a counter like this. This box was called a type case, and it was a compartmentalized wooden box where all letters were placed in order. You had all the A's, all the B's together, all the C's together, making it easy to pick what you need to compose the word and a sentence that you were going to print. And of course, you guessed it, on the top of that box, that wooden case, you had the uppercase, which were the caps, and at the bottom of the case, the type case, you had the lowercase, which were the lowercase. Another interesting fact about anatomy of a typeface is the size of each letter is not consistent. Some letters are slightly taller than others. Every letter with an apex, which is the tip of an A, that's the apex, or the top of an O, that's the apex here. All those letters have to be slightly lower and higher than an I, for example. The A, the apex on the top, will be a little bit taller. The bottom will be the same as an I. And that is to visually compensate, make the letters all look the same height. Today's new typefaces or fonts are created every day. There is literally zillions of fonts that you can download from the internet. That poses a danger. Not all designs are good or rigorous. Good taste or well designed. And you might end up with a font that doesn't look very professional, which will make you not very professional and which will impede the impact of your document and the content and what you are talking about. Pick a good font, you will look professional, and whatever you have to say in your text will be a lot stronger and more professional. It will make you look like you know what you are talking about. Few things to remember. Stick to common fonts. most often used. There is already plenty of very common fonts. Stick to those and you can't go wrong. If you start to venture in weird and fancy designs, that can be very risky and you might regret it. Use display typeface very conservatively. Display typeface are used for main headings. You need character for those main headings. You need to make sure that the personality, the character of the font you pick for those main headings will be appropriate to the content and suited to the content and the subject matter, and also suited to your target audience. Be very wary with fancy design, weird fonts that are a little bit too loud, a little bit out there. Stick to something original, but not crazy. Watch the kerning. The kerning is the space between each individual letter relative to each other. An A and an I will look very apart. An I and an N will look too close. You need to put more space between an I and an N. You need to put less space between an O and an N because they look very far apart. The white space between each letter will dictate how much you need to change their spacing relative to each other. That is only valid for headings, big headings. Don't bother with that with subheadings too much, but definitely don't bother with that for the main copy. Another thing to remember and pay attention to is the justification of your colons and also the hyphenation of words in the colon. If you decide to have your colons ragged left, which means that it's aligned to the left, and the right side of the colon is all jagged, that's ragged left, aligned to the left. Then you don't need hyphenation. It looks a lot better if the words are whole. If you want to have both justified left and right side of the colon, which is a justified colon, then you will need hyphenation on your paragraphs. Words will be cut in order to have the spacing, the tracking between each words correct. If your colon is very wide, don't bother with the hyphenation. The space will be evenly distributed between each words. You have enough room with a wide colon to do that. If it's a short colon, then yes, I will allow hyphenation for a short colon, justified. A big no-no in typography is to finish a page with the first line only of the paragraph and the rest of the paragraph start on the next page. You have one lonely line at the bottom of the page. It doesn't look good, it doesn't look professional. Don't do that. At least 2 lines at the bottom of the page, or flick that last line on the next page to start the paragraph fresh in a new page. Another no-no is to start a page with just one last line of a paragraph of the previous page. Do not start a page with just one line. Flick 2 lines from the previous page on that page, or flick the last line on the previous page. But never start a new page with just one line. Another thing to be very careful of is how you finish your paragraphs. Do not have just one word, even 2 words on the very last line of a paragraph. It looks too short, unsightly, not professional. Leave it at least 3 words. Try to manage the space. Increase the space between words and letters in your paragraph to flick at least 3 words on the very last line of that paragraph. It will look a lot better. Adrian Frutiger, Univer and Frutiger, beautiful fonts. Carol Tambly, Myriad, used on computers and emails everywhere. Claude Garamond, everybody knows Garamond. Eric Spiekermann, Meta. Jan Chibold, Saban. John Baskerville, famous for his Baskerville font. Jonathan Hoffler, contemporary designer of very famous font like Requiem. Matthew Carter, which we owe Georgia and Verdana, often used on emails and word processors. Max Medinger, Helvetica. Everybody knows Helvetica. All designers know Helvetica. We use Helvetica all the time. It's probably the font the most used. Paul Rayner, Futura. I love Futura. Stanley Morrison, Bembo and Times New Roman. Who doesn't know Times New Roman? Tobias Fair-Jones, another contemporary, created Gotham, beautiful font. George Peignot, a Frenchman, a type founder, who launched the Garamond and created the Cochin font. Giambattista Bodoni, who created the Bodoni. Patrick Thomas, a contemporary designer who has a beautiful use of typography for his graphic design. Neville Brody, Another English designer, graphic designer, very famous in the 90s for his designs in the magazine Rolling Stones. They were beautiful pages. Stefan Stagmeister, another contemporary Austrian, now based in New York, who is an excellent designer who used typography in beautiful and novel ways. When we refer to typography, we always refer to the printed type. But since typography is an evolution from the handwritten type, it is impossible to not mention calligraphy when we are talking about typography. Calligraphy is the art of handwriting. And as we saw earlier, it was also how books were reproduced before the invention of the printing press. They were all using black letter type of handwriting to copy all those books. Today, calligraphy has evolved and it becomes an art form on its own, not only in the Western world. Just look at Chinese calligraphy, Arabic calligraphy, which is absolutely stunning, European and American calligraphy. Just have a look at beautiful work done by somebody like Raul Alejandro. There are so many more like him, and the work is just stunning and an inspiration for your typography layout. One of the things that I really love in my job as a graphic designer is when a client doesn't have anything to give me to do a layout, a poster or cover of a magazine or whatever. And I've got nothing. I've got no photos, no illustration. I've got just text and the headings. There, typography plays a major role. That's all I have to play with, the font itself. Use those words as graphic element, visual elements. And that's a challenge I really love. Just look at what's possible with just text as graphic element. And see you next time. Bye!